Hello, my name is Joanna Raisbeck. I'm the coordinator of the German Classic Prize, and this year's text is Schiller's Maria Stuart.
My name's Joanna Neilly, and I'm a tutor in German at St Peter's College, Oxford.
Yes, so what we're going to do is talk about what is the centrepiece of the play. It's an invented meeting between Mary and Elisabeth. It could have happened in real life. Mary did request during her time in captivity to meet Elisabeth. Elisabeth always rebuffed these requests, I think for good reason, as we find out in the play. It would have been a very politically difficult situation for Elisabeth to control. How does this scene come to be? How does it kind of constructed in the play? Because it's quite difficult for Elisabeth to be convinced to meet Mary in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. So Mary, as you say, has been in captivity, or officially as a guest of Elizabeth in Fotheringay Castle, but captivity she's not really allowed to leave. And there's a question of treason and whether or not Mary is guilty of a plot against Elizabeth, a plot on her life. And there's a question that comes up later in the play after this scene, really, of the death warrant. So that is, will Elizabeth sign the warrant which will have Mary, Queen of Scots, executed? And that question's still open when we get to this scene. Now, there are supporters of Mary who are Elizabeth's advisors. Leicester, for example, and Shrewsbury have come round to Mary's cause, and they hope that if they can engineer a meeting between Elizabeth and Mary, that Elizabeth will somehow be moved. It will be maybe difficult for her as a person to sign a death warrant after a meeting. I think that is an important idea, that somehow if you meet someone in person, humanity maybe comes out over politics. In any case, they're trying to engineer this meeting. Elizabeth, though, as you said, hasn't wanted to meet Mary, although Mary has asked to meet Elizabeth. Elizabeth has been, in a sense, tricked into meeting Mary. She doesn't want to meet her, but her vanity has been flattered. There are lots of rumours that Elizabeth's heard about Maria's beauty, about how men are attracted to Maria. Maria has had 3 husbands by this point, and Elizabeth, still unmarried, the Virgin Queen, and she wants to remain unmarried, but somehow is nonetheless convinced to be slightly jealous of these ideas that Maria could be in any sense superior to her, even if that is a superiority to do with her beauty rather than her power. So Leicester has very shrewdly appealed to Elizabeth's vanity. Her political instincts are too good. She won't meet her because her political instincts are strong. She shouldn't meet her. But then when her vanity is appealed to, she agrees to meet her. And because Leicester suggests that once she sees Mary, Elizabeth will realise how much superior she herself is in every possible way, in beauty and in power. So that's how it's come about. And in the background of this play, we have these 2 men who've been engineering the meeting, but at this point they don't speak very much. Suddenly the stage is given over to the 2 women to speak to each other directly for the first time. And that's, I think, the really dramatic potential of the scene, and the dramatic potential which is fulfilled in the scene. How will these 2 women respond to each other when they're brought together through the cunning of men?
Absolutely. So I think it's worth saying that the way in which the meeting has been orchestrated from Leicester's perspective is that it's supposed to look like it's accidental,
yes,
that they happen to meet each other.
Absolutely.
In Fotheringay. And Elizabeth kind of plays along with this because she asks, where is this? But what we get even before this scene, well, we have Elizabeth arriving, but we have then Mary finding out in advance that Elizabeth is going to be there. And then she considers, even before the meeting, how am I going to talk to her? Because she's been waiting for this moment for 17 years.
Yes.
And that's what makes the difference between the 2 queens in this scene.
Yeah,
and we have this
absolutely.
great kind of thoughts beforehand that Mary says, Ich habe darauf geharret, jahrelang mich darauf bereitet, alles habe ich mir gesagt und ins Gedächtnis eingeschrieben, wie ich sie rühren wollte und bewegen. So she wants to move her, she wants to use kind of her rhetorical gifts
Yes.
to affect Elizabeth. But then we have, vergessen plötzlich, ausgelöscht ist alles, nichts lebt in mir in diesem Augenblick, als meine Leiden brennendes Gefühl. So we have, I want to move her,
Yeah.
but there is so much emotion, passion generated by, I suppose, her suffering as well, that the question is, can Mary control herself
It's quite an interesting contrast, isn't it? I mean, I suppose the question that's being posed by Schiller before this scene also is, can you move someone to pity through rational argument, through pragmatism, through reasoned words?
Yes.
Or is the spectacle of human emotion the thing that moves us more? And I think it turns out that the latter is true, but not in a good way for Mary.
Not for Elisabeth. So actually to the scene itself, so we start off with, then Mary's first comment is quite interesting. Aus diesen Zügen spricht kein Herz. And that kind of draws on that point of rational argument or appealing to someone's emotions. She's saying, I can't possibly move her. So what do we get from our first kind of interactions between the two women?
There's an interesting idea here, which perhaps we'll come back to, that when the men leave the field, everything goes wrong, which is perhaps a question we don't want to get into too much. We'll come back to that later. But yes, they step back a bit and the two women take centre stage. And first of all, Mary's instinct is not to subordinate herself too much to Elisabeth. So Elisabeth says she's surprised when she sees Mary, not at this point because of how she looks, but because of how she's holding herself. She says, wer war es denn, der eine tiefgebeugte mir angekündigt, eine stolze finde ich. And who is this proud woman before me? You promised me, Leicester promised me, that I would see a woman who was bent by her misfortune, who was cast down. But no, here's this proud woman, and she doesn't like this, obviously. And Maria then realises perhaps the more pragmatic approach is in fact to kneel before the Queen, and she does it. So she kneels down to her and says, Der Himmel hat für euch entschieden, Schwester. And I think that's really interesting because the first part of the line, fate, God, heaven has decided for you. You are the victor, you are superior to me. The second part, she calls her Schwester, my sister. So what's she saying here? I'm the same as you, but you're also superior. She's trying to play the game pragmatically to get Elisabeth on her side, but at the same time she's still saying we are equals. As it happens, you're in the superior position because God has so decided, or fate has so decided. But she does at least give the impression of, the physical impression of being subordinate to Elisabeth. She kneels in front of her and then says, now that I have acknowledged your superiority, why don't you show clemency, reach me your hand and lift me up so that we can talk together? And Elisabeth says, no, you belong in the dust, essentially, in front of me at my feet. So there's a pragmatic, as you said, I thought it was really interesting. Mary realises emotion is not going to work here. An emotional plea is not going to work. Let's appeal to Elisabeth's superiority or to flattery, but also ask her to speak to me on a level.
And that tension is precisely the problem that we have in this scene. So appealing to her as a Schwester, as a sister, they're cousins, I think. And that creates the kind of the blood connection, the personal connection between them. But as soon as she says, we are equals in some way, mich zu erheben von dem tiefen Fall, that's almost suggesting bring me up to your level.
Yes, absolutely.
Which, of course, they are in terms of status. But Elisabeth can't even countenance that or kind of consider that thought, because that would mean that would bring in the question of who's the legitimate one to be on the throne. And hence why Elizabeth says, Ihr seid an euren Platz, Lady Maria.
And this is Elizabeth's first insult, in a way, or rejection to Maria in this scene. If we look at it from Maria's perspective, she has acknowledged the victor, as it were, and she has said, can you be lenient and dignified in victory and at least recognise me as someone who deserves your respect to a degree? And Elisabeth has said, no, you belong at my feet. So number one, she insults her here as a queen, and other insults come through, as we'll see. She insults her later on for her religion and finally as a woman, but we'll perhaps get to that. But this is insult number one, which Mary withstands for pragmatic reasons. She doesn't want to get too emotional and lose her head, for want of a better
in a way
phrase.
this is Mary's attempt to somehow make it politically viable for Elizabeth to show clemency to her. So appealing to all these qualities you would expect of a ruler, clemency, being kind of magnanimous as well. And Elizabeth just pushes that away. Then we have this sense of, well, actually, denkt an den Wechsel alles Menschlichen. This is a question of fate as well, of chance, that actually this wasn't really my fault in any way. It's simply how the way things turned out. But we are related as well. Do not kind of reject someone who also has the kind of Tudor blood.
Schändet nicht das Blut der Tudor. I think this is an interesting idea, this denkt an den Wechsel alles Menschlichen. So she's appealed to her as a queen. Now she's saying something about human fate, isn't she?
Yeah.
It could be you in my position, and I could be in your position. Dangerous thing to say, because although she's talking about it in abstract terms here, for, you know, in a different life it would be the other way around, she's also saying actually literally it could be the other way around, and as you said, of course it could be, and she represents here a danger still to Elizabeth.
Exactly. No, I think that's absolutely correct. So Elizabeth could be thinking, what are you trying to get at?
Yeah.
And then Mary also appeals to, I want to move you in some way. She finds Elizabeth intimidating in some way. Mich anschaut mit dem Eisesblick, schließt sich das Herz mir schaudernd zu, der Strom der Tränen stockt, ein kautes Grausen fesselt die Flehensworte mir im Busen an. I mean, this is a performance as well of kind of, almost of a rhetorical supplication.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's always this idea of Elizabeth is kalt und streng we have here. She's strong, but she's also cold. Yeah. How do you move a person like this?
Exactly. And so but Elizabeth then explains why that's the case, because she's well aware that Mary would rather have her killed than anything. That would be her argument in response. And then Mary comes out again with a kind of a repetition of the previous scene. Womit soll ich den Anfang machen? Wie die Worte klüglich stellen. Klüglich is very important. Dass sie euch das Herz ergreifen, aber nicht verletzten. And then what's Mary's argument that we have?
Well, she's moved on. She tries a different tactic, essentially. She's moved on from saying we are both queens, recognise me as such. That's not going to hold any water with Elizabeth. So the next strategy, if we're thinking that she's speaking strategically, and I think she is at least partly, the next strategy is to say, let's speak together. Ihr seid nicht schuldig. Ich bin auch nicht schuldig. We are the instruments of our times, the instruments of other people's machinations. She says now we're with each other. At some point she talks about the other men. Wuchs mit uns und böse Menschen fachten der unglückseligen Flamme Atem zu. Other people's schemes have put us in this position, but now we're with each other. Jetzt, Schwester, redet. Tell me what I'm guilty of. I'll hear it, but let's not let the kind of scheming, maybe this is a hint at all the other men in the background, actually. Let's not let the schemers come between us. Let's speak to each other in person. Forget the politics, or at least forget the self-serving politics of certain advisors in Elizabeth's court, and speak to me. So she appeals to her here maybe slightly more on a personal, on a human level, not as a queen, but just as two people who are not fully guilty.
And I think what's important here as well is saying we are products of a particular context, which is to do with kind of civil conflict as well. Mary starts off by saying, that you do have an element of pride as well, that saying that you acted wrongly against me, that you have unjustly held me in captivity and infringed kind of the rights of hospitality as well. However, she qualifies that by saying we are a product of our times in some way. And is Mary asking the impossible of Elizabeth by saying, let's just talk as human beings, as Schwester?
Of course, I think this reminds Elizabeth then, well, reminds her, but prompts her to talk about the unbridgeable gulf between them. And as you said, it's not just political, it's religious as well. And this is then when we get on to the sort of second insult. No, it was right of me never to want to meet you, actually. Mein guter Stern bewahrte mich davor, die Natter an den Busen mir zu legen. It's nothing to do with fate, it's nothing to do with our times. It's your black heart, eures schwarzes Herz, und die wilde Ehrsucht eures Hauses. Your blackened heart and your ambition. And your glory hunting, essentially. And this moves into Catholic conspiracy plots, as Elizabeth sees it. And anyway, even if I were to make peace with you, that wouldn't pacify the Catholic Church, who are happy to murder and do all sorts of terrible things in order to get you or someone they approve of onto my throne. There's nothing the Catholics won't do. How can I possibly make peace with you? So she becomes a kind of, we see here Elizabeth's, I want to say paranoia, but there are justifiably, in some sense, there are some plots against her, and but she is worried about a Catholic insurrection, but she takes this to such an extreme when she essentially says, Die Kirche trennet aller Pflichtenband. If you're aligned with the Catholic Church, you don't care about any duty.
Yes, you have no duties of blood towards your people or towards people of your blood as well. And we have a reference to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which is related to Mary's connections as well, because she was once married to the King of France. And it was kind of in France we had this Catholic mob violence against the Huguenots, killing of Protestants. I think that's absolutely justified as far as I'm concerned, that's justified from Elizabeth's part, because she's in a precarious position. Yeah. She's not married. If she does get married, that would weaken her position. But she's in a slightly difficult situation anyway, because she has these advances from the French court. And then Mary says, oh no, das ist euer traurig finstere Argwohn. She's almost saying that it's almost some sort of kind of psychological paranoia, as you said. Not that they're completely unfounded, but it's trying to say, no, see me as a friend in some way, which Elizabeth doesn't accept at all.
Well, she said, essentially, I pose no danger to you because I don't want to take over your throne right now or in your lifetime. Hättet ihr zu eurer Erben mich erklärt, if you'd name me as your successor. Name me as your successor. If you'd done that before, we wouldn't have come to all this trouble. I don't want to take over, but once you're gone, I'm next in line. We come back to the question here then about Elizabeth's, well, she's got two big problems. She's got Mary and she's got the question of her own marriage. If only Elizabeth could marry and produce an heir, then Mary's claim as her heir or as her direct heir would disappear. But she's not married and she doesn't have children, and so Mary has a claim to be her heir.
Yes. And you could make the argument that her power is contingent on her remaining the Virgin Queen. And this
absolutely. So just essentially that she's saying, of course we can treat each other with respect. I don't want you out of the way now. I just want you to admit that I should come after you. But again, actually in a sense that would also imply somehow that Elizabeth had failed, because she would have failed to provide an heir in her line, and it would shift to a competitor as a future competitor while she's still alive.
Yes, it's kind of worth saying as an aside in the historical account that Elizabeth did actually agree for James, Mary's son, to be her heir, but he was raised as a Protestant, not as a Catholic, and that was quite a clever political move to solve that problem. But here, in the context of the play, I don't think that really comes in, but it's worth thinking about it when Mary says, make me your heir. That, of course, says, make England Catholic in some way,
absolutely.
Which is so problematic. And then Elizabeth calls her eine listige Armida, but the idea is, given by that, is that Mary would be the woman seducing the youth of England in some way.
And seducing them away from Christianity.
Mary's never going to be the rightful heir to Elizabeth now.
Yeah. So you're not a queen and you don't have the right religion, and what comes next then?
Then
the good bit.
Then it's simply Mary tries to say, okay, let's bring this to an end. If this isn't going to work, why not? Why don't you just show your clemency? And it's kind of returning to the original point in a way of of showing clemency. Please show that you are a magnanimous ruler, appealing to those qualities and saying that, why don't you give me my freedom? And then you will be perceived in such a positive light by other rulers. This is very politically clever for you to do. I don't really take Mary's argument though here. I don't think it is as politically clever as she's portraying it to be. Elizabeth's response is fabulous to this, because this is a thing that pushes Elizabeth a little bit too far.
So it's her triumph, Elizabeth's triumph, or at least Mary's saying, okay, I renounce my claim. We're not equal and I renounce my claim, but at least give me my freedom.
Yep.
If I can't have anything else, I want my freedom. And Elizabeth says, aha, so will you finally admit that you're beaten? Is it all over with your schemes? Ist kein Mörder mehr unterwegs?
Yes.
Will kein Abenteurer für euch die traurige Ritterschaft mehr wagen? What she's really saying here, won't you find some other kind of adventurer, knight, to carry on for you. And what she's saying is, won't you get another man to plot to murder me? And what she's really saying here is, yeah, you will seduce any man to achieve your aims. But then she says, actually, es ist aus. Ihr verführt mir keinen mehr. Die Welt hat andere Sorgen. Es lüstet keinen euer Vierter man. There's a lovely pause.
Yes,
before
exactly.
Your fourth husband. How many have you had already? 4. You wouldn't have a fourth one. Because ihr tötet eure Freier wie eure Männer. So she's kind of saying, are you really saying it's over? You're not going to try and seduce somebody else again to get in my way?
Yes.
It's about these plots again on Elisabeth. And the idea here coming in now is that Maria uses her good looks, her femininity to seduce men and then get them to carry out murder plots, evil deeds.
Exactly.
So she's a cunning woman who relies on her own powers of seduction.
It's worth probably saying, background to this comment is that Mary's second husband, Darnley, was killed, or one of the plotters then became her third husband. And Mary had to abdicate. She abandoned the throne of Scotland, and it basically caused a civil war in Scotland. So this is what Elizabeth is referring to, that you cause so much political instability.
But also by your sexual behaviour.
By your sexual behaviour. And basically also, you're past it now, kind of 17 years later.
Yes, absolutely. So
and this is where it gets quite personal as well. And Mary is horrified by this, appeals, Schwester, Schwester, or Gott, Gott, gib mir Mäßigung.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth is not going to back down, and then we have this tremendous insult.
So what happens here is the scene turns from something which could be, I mean, it's not looking hopeful for Mary, but they're still talking in terms of politics and religious difference and, claimants to the throne and so on, all kind of pragmatic questions, even if they are highly charged ones. And it turns at this point into a really kind of personalised attack on each other's femininity and also virtue and reputation as women, i.e. their kind of sexual reputation. And what's interesting is that while Mary has had 3 husbands and maybe a 4th could be in the wings, Elizabeth has been unmarried. So where does Mary hurt her? She can't attack her virtue, so she attacks the virtue of her mother, Anne Boleyn, whose marriage to Henry, as you said, wouldn't have been recognised by the Catholic Church. So she loses her cool at this point and attacks Elizabeth in a very personal way. And it seems to suggest that these 2 women can't be left together long before they turn into quarrelling women.
And what's interesting here is that Elizabeth kind of has this pun of es kostet nicht die allgemeine Schönheit zu sein, als die gemeine sein für alle.
Yeah.
She's calling Mary a kind of common and loose woman who uses her sexuality with anyone who will be politically convenient for her to be with. What is quite interesting as well, leading from that, is that Mary's absolutely furious about this, but she's von Zorn glühend. Doch mit einer edlen Würde.
Yeah.
That she's still got this kind of noble dignity about her, and she admits to her failings.
Yeah.
Now, this is a rhetorical gesture, sure, but it's an admission to, I've been seduced by power in some way, but I am better than people think I am. That's when she comes in with her fantastic barb about Anne Boleyn.
Yeah. She's implying that she's better than Elizabeth, but then she hits her with the same base kind of remark.
Yes, exactly.
She doesn't claim that she's honourable initially. Well, she does, but it's the stage directions, as you say. She's got a noble worthiness in her very face. So Schiller seems to be suggesting Mary here has got the upper hand in terms of a kind of morality and dignity. And then she tries to argue this herself. Yes, I've done wrong, but we know what happened with your mother. You didn't inherit Ehrbarkeit. You don't have any honour on your side of the family. Man weiß, welcher Totenwillen Anne von Boleyn das Schafott bestiegen. So Anne Boleyn was executed under charges, maybe trumped up charges of adultery and incest. So because Elizabeth is the Virgin Queen, Mary attacks her mother, and this brings back also the fear about Elizabeth's own legitimacy on the throne, because her mother may not have been recognised as a rightful queen by, well, certainly she wasn't by the Catholic Church. But it gets down to such a base level here. That's the thing that I find quite disturbing about this scene as a woman, that it's when they get really angry, it's not to do with politics or religion. It's this base idea about who is the least virtuous, who is the more common of the women. And
but that silences Elizabeth.
Yeah,
here.
Of course.
That is Elizabeth says
it's a sore point, isn't it?
It's a sore point, and Elizabeth says no more. What do you make of this ending with where Mary kind of really comes to the fore? She is infuriated. She is kind of offloading all this anger that she's built up over the years, all the in her captivity, the kind of suffering that she's had. She's been waiting to talk to her for 17 years, so it all comes out at this point. What do you make of these?
She might as well have signed her own death warrant, mightn't she? Because she says, yes, the throne of England has been entweiht, desecrated by a bastard, an illegitimate child. So you are not the rightful heir to the throne because of your mother and her loose ways, essentially. And
your father.
Your father, who wasn't interested in you, absolutely. So at the end, she's essentially undone any of the diplomatic work she has done in this scene. I only want to be your heir, I don't want to take over. And then she says, actually, I'll give up my claim, just give me my freedom. But then she undoes all that and says, you've no right to the throne, I'm the real ruler. Ich bin euer König. And who's that? Elizabeth herself. I'm the ruler over you as well as of England. So, and she bases it, of course, on the idea that, well, you talk about me seducing men away, but that's exactly what your mother did to Henry VIII. And now we've got a bastard on the throne, in her words, and it's my throne. So she just undoes anything that looked a bit like diplomacy in this scene is gone. She hits Elizabeth where it hurts. The next scene, briefly, we see Mary still shaking with anger, but pleased that Leicester had witnessed this. So that kind of seems to imply that there is a vanity there, that she's glad to have had an audience, and a male audience, see her bring Elizabeth to the dust. But as I say, she might as well have signed her own execution order, because after this, Elizabeth is not going to be lenient. If she wasn't lenient to begin with, this is not going to have helped.
And the question then is, what did Mary hope to get out of this meeting if she didn't lose it, as it were?
Well, yes, quite. But it's interesting, of course, because she tries to be more reasonable than she might be by nature. It's implied that she is a very emotional woman in the play. She's very sensuous. She kind of follows on emotional impulses. But she tries to suppress that. She tries to be reasonable and rational. She presents arguments to Elizabeth that are based on an idea of human respect, even if there are certain political conditions that make it difficult. We can still speak reasonably to each other as queens, as sisters, as human beings. None of this reason works anyway on Elizabeth, but instead of then using an emotional, she doesn't kind of emotionally then say, well, what can I do? I'm nothing, you must help me. She just turns on her. But we can see why. I mean, Elizabeth has got her barb in at last. Her third insult, this is the third insult, has worked. And in a sense, it's a political victory. If it's a moral or emotional victory for Mary, in some sense, it could be a political victory for Elizabeth, because it proves that Mary is after the throne in her mind.
Exactly. It proves that Mary is dangerous in herself, not just as a symbol of Catholic hopes that she is to other characters like Mortimer. But Elizabeth is quite deeply shaken by this. And what's interesting, it's worth saying probably as a kind of almost a concluding note, that for the rest of this act we have everything through Mary's perspective or through Mary's account. We don't see Elizabeth again until the fourth act, which is really when this question of do I have the death warrant signed or not comes to the fore, and that's brilliantly played out. It's a shame that it kind of ends in the way it does for Mary, because you're absolutely right, it does mean that she has sealed her fate. There is no way in which her pride kind of is almost too great for her to submit to Elizabeth in the way that Elizabeth would like, and Elizabeth is so sceptical about Mary anyway, having heard so much about her, about really her ability to manipulate people.
I think for me the most troubling question, maybe it's just a question we can leave it on, but is what is Schiller saying here about women when they're in, can women not be politicians? Can women not take the position of power without descending, or is he saying actually these are victims of the men's manipulations? But it's very interesting that it turns so personal and such an attack on female sexuality really at the end.
Yes, it becomes somehow base, and why should it be personal when, I mean, I think the problem is really prepared in Mary's character and the way it's presented beforehand, that there's a kind of volatility there that we're told could lead it to become a kind of barrage of insults, which it does from both sides. But no, I take the point. It does present a problem of how two women who are politically powerful speak to each other.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just this particular constellation that you have two women who have irreconcilable positions. Not so much essentialising it as something of femininity,
absolutely,
but showing it as a problem for Elisabeth in particular, because that is her femininity and how she suppresses it is so important to her power and the play itself as well.